Welcome to the Brave Feminine Leadership podcast, where I get to dig into conversations with global leaders and we get to soak up their wisdom and perspective on all things life and leadership. And today I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by John Batistich, or JB as I know you. JB, welcome.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks for the opportunity, I think.
We will share with the audience how John's shared with me how he doesn't really like talking about himself. So, for everyone else listening who's uncomfortable with that too, it's okay. And it's important to do it sometimes. But, JB, I'm going to share your bio so people know who I'm talking to. So, John Batistich, a seasoned business leader with over 30 years of experience across marketing, digital transformation, customer experience, and human resources, having held executive roles at Westfield, PepsiCo, Wrigley, Kimberly-Clark, and more. John has built a reputation as a strategic growth expert who understands how brands can evolve in a rapidly changing world. He served as a non-executive director at Zipco, where he saw that business scale from a startup in 2016 to a business valued at over 3.5 billion. Served as a director at Stella Group BPO and the Heart Research Institute, and is currently on the board of Foodco Group, Subi, and Versa AI. John is a leading voice on the future of customer-centric business strategies, digital disruption, and leadership transformation. As I said before, John, incredible to have you with me. I'm going to throw you straight into the place you don't want to go, which is let's touch on growing up and your career story and all of those good things. So, who are you as a human being, John?
Well, I'm a son, a husband, and father. I grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney. I spent some time in Adelaide, in a traditional working class family. I have a younger brother and sister. So, as the eldest son, I had a strong sense of responsibility, particularly in my family. My father worked in a lab and didn't have a lot of ambition. He will call that out. So there was a little bit of hope around me, and that led to some self-reliance. I went through school, was a reasonable student, and completed a Bachelor of Business degree. And then in the early 90s, when unemployment was double digit, I got a job at Lion Nathan, which was the largest liquor, uh, marketer brand in the country, beer and spirits. And I entered their first ever graduate program. I spent time as a merchandiser, a sales representative. I then became an analyst, a research executive, and then assistant brand manager, and all that in 5 years. It was an incredible learning experience. You don't get those opportunities anymore. And
Right.
that gave me way more responsibility than they should have. I was involved in an acquisition and the launch of a brand. So it was just incredible at that age to have that kind of experience. I then got an opportunity, asked to join Kimberly-Clark, and they were at that time a leading fast-moving consumer good business with brands like Kleenex and Huggies. I joined as a senior brand manager, then became a marketing manager. I spent four years in that business working across facial tissue, paper towel, toilet paper, a whole range of consumer good current companies. It was categories. It was a very considered, analytical organization working in pharmacy and grocery effectively. I then got an opportunity to join, I was asked to join PepsiCo, again, one of the largest fast-moving consumer good businesses in the world. I worked in their snack business, so salty snacks and the like. I joined as a marketing manager, got promoted to a marketing director of core brands I think it was just before my 30th birthday. And I spent 4 years in communications, product innovation, and then after 4 years got an opportunity to join the Wrigley Company, which is part of the big Mars conglomerate. And I joined briefly as a marketing director, and then soon after became the regional managing director of that business just before my 35th birthday. Um, it was, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but it was well before what I expected. Um,
Yeah.
and so I was all of a sudden 35 and was the regional managing director of a business that was generating more than $60 million worth of net profit. So it was profitable. Um, and after I was in that role for 4 years. So there is this 4 year, 4 year, 5 year kind of theme. Um, After a global restructure, I left to do a master's degree,
Mhm.
uh, majoring in human resources. I had the customer and the brand focus, but I really didn't know enough about people and organizations. So I did a master's full time at MGSM. And unlike my undergraduate, where I kind of was a little bit distracted playing in bands and so on. I really focused in and I actually won 4 university awards. And at the same time was doing some consulting with DDB. And then DDB asked me to help them with Interbrand, which was the world's largest branding strategy and valuation consulting agency, with very well known in the US and Europe, and was not doing as well in this part of the world. And they asked me to lead and restage that. So I kind of built that plan, and then I got an opportunity to work with, and I was pretty intentional about not going into agency world, not going into consumer good companies. I wanted to work in a different category. I believe that going into unknown areas, using your skills, showing that agility was going to be important. I wanted to work in an organization that was large and that was Australian and was making local decisions. Because
Mhm.
what I found in those consumer good companies is the Australian businesses were starting to become um, satellite offices
Yes.
to European or US decision making. And I joined Westfield. At that time, Westfield was an ASX 10, and I was with that business for 9 years. I became a director, and I was running marketing and then ultimately all the digital business. And that was a critical expansion of my responsibilities. At the same time, I completed a ADMA course, um, and which was about keeping relevant around digital.
Mhm.
And then during my tenure at Westfield, I joined the board of the Heart Research Institute. Um, it wasn't planned. I was approached, and it meant a lot to me because my grandfather, who came to this country when he was 16 in the late 1920s, he changed the course of our family. He died of a massive heart attack at
Mhm.
52 years of age. So I felt that I would do and work in his honor. I spent 9 years on that board. I was chair of fundraising, and I was also a member of the REM and NOM committee. Uh, so that was during Westfield, and I completed obviously the graduate of Australian Institute of Company Directors. So there is this theme of in every role I've taken, I've expanded responsibilities, and I've been a lifelong learner.
Learn. I can pick that
Bachelor,
up. Yeah.
master, certifications, graduate AICD, and then after 9 years at Westfield, I decided to kind of change gear, see more of my young sons. Uh, that was weighing heavily on me. In my MD role, I was doing a lot of traveling. At Westfield, it was an all-in, all-consuming role, and I felt like I needed to make a change. And on my literally my 9 year anniversary, I left that business, and having worked some 28 or 29 years in big global corporates, I decided to do the opposite and work with a range of startups. And I had a lot of exposure in my digital responsibilities at Westfield. Um, and that felt like something that I really wanted to learn more about. So I started to consult with 3 startups within literally weeks of leaving Westfield. One failed, one flatlined, and then I got lucky with Zip. And as you said earlier on, I started as an advisor in 2016 after speaking with Larry Diamond, the founder. Larry said, "Do you want to work with Zip?" And I said, "Well, I don't really want a role. I want a bit of a portfolio career." And he said, "Well, come and work with us." And I
Mm.
said, "Well, I could probably do that in an advisory capacity." And he said, "But there's one problem. I won't be able to afford your day rates." And I said, "That's okay. Let's let's work on shares." And
Yeah.
you grant me shares. And I did almost the opposite to what I'd learned in my career. We didn't have an agreement. We had a handshake. I said that you would define the shares that you would offer me, and I would then decide whether I wanted to continue that.
Mm.
Um, and after 2 years as an advisor, I then went on the board. At the time of working with the business, it had a market cap of $23 million. It'd been backdoor listed through a mining company, would you believe? We had about 20 people. And then I left that board at the end of November last year. Um, and it wasn't a straight line, I might add, with
Yeah.
a market cap of more than 3.5 billion, and with more than 1,200 people. And over that time, I chaired REM People and Culture committees, chaired the Cyber Security Council, um, was a member of obviously audit and risk, um, went through a multiple fundraising, convertible notes, new markets, and some really tough times. But the business is has got real momentum and growth under some fantastic leaders in Cynthia Scott as CEO and Diane Smith Gander as chair. I've also had just finally a range of other boards, Stella, Moose Group, Sunnyfield Disability Services, and then my current boards, as you said, Food Co Group, which I've been on the board for, I think, for about 8 years, Subi, which evolved out of my work with General Pants Group, and then Versa AI, which is a customer contact automation business that I've invested in. So that's as briefly as I could outline a bit of a story of me.
What an amazing career. And I've already got a million questions. But you know where I'm going to start with that is I'm going to start with it's an interesting shift to see someone go from a marketing discipline into a managing director role. It's not as common as I think perhaps it could be. And I say that because I think marketing can be one of those areas where, it's incredibly strategically important. It's a lot to do with customer insights and brand equity and brand building and all sorts of things. But sometimes people get pigeonholed in that space and people don't see their leadership breadth. How did that happen? Like, what do you think the things are that helped in that space? I mean, you're also so, I mean, 35, um, you know,
Yeah, I guess consumer companies' marketing has a significant role to play. So marketing leaders of MDs or CEOs are more common. But you're right in the premise of your question. Certainly um, less common in a lot of other verticals or categories. So in those consumer companies, usually commercial, those who are leading the route to market, given the cost to serve working with major retailers, and marketers tended to be places, and I was, I guess, fortunate. There was a transformation required. It was a mature but profitable business, and there was some new leadership globally that said we want to re-stimulate growth. And it was difficult for me because as I said, I was just under 35, um, was completely underprepared, unsupported. My C-suite were all in their 50s and 60s, uh,
Mm.
three of which had spent more than 20 years with the business, one of which believed that they were the natural
Yeah.
leader, and I was the disruptive new generational choice to reignite growth in this very profitable business.
Mm.
Um, so I guess there was sometimes you're fortunate you're in the right category at the right time. I'd shown enough in my experience, and I was only in that business for, I think it was maybe 9 or 10 months before I got the role, and I um, um, was very surprised. I remember in the room going, "Me?
Mm.
So I'm going to lead the business." It was like I had to ask a number of times because it was not something that I considered was um, it wasn't my time or my turn, I guess. But it came with excitement and anxiety, but it happened. But it also wasn't a straight line for me. It didn't continue along those lines. As I said, I took some time to do post-grad, did some consulting, and then went back in to a big corporate. But what was really critical for me is to make sure that my role and impact continually expanded, and it was my digital responsibilities, running the digital business, which there were some really big transformational projects. I built out the converged service network. Think about that as the NBN for all Westfield malls, which created Wi-Fi and a whole range of other critical technologies. And then the Wi-Fi created location analytics platforms for us. I built out the first marketplace for a mall on the planet, uh, which was called the Westfield Searchable Mall, which then went global, and we built a lot of that product here with our engineers and our product managers and the like. So, and that was well before its time, back in that period 2011, 12, and beyond.
JB, one more question about that period. I think most of the CEOs I interview can remember very well that first day, week, or month in the CEO role and often reflect on maybe what surprised them about it. I hear from what you've shared, the role probably came about. You probably weren't necessarily thinking about it in the first place, came about. You're a bit shocked about why choose me. But can you remember that time? Can you remember what surprised you about the role?
Yeah, it was a surprise. I believed I was not ready.
Yeah.
Uh, that there were others that had more experience and certainly more knowledge of the company.
But you're in
As I
it.
said,
But you're in it now, so you got to do it.
yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. So what surprised me is one, that I was underprepared and undersupported. So what that did is led me to say, well, I need to chart my own course here.
yeah,
It needed to be self-directed. And I remember one of the early things is appointing my own coach, that I would share my reflections on my leadership, usually the things I didn't do as well as I'd like, enough awareness to do that, and then help me find new paths. I was surprised about I needed to rely on influence and coaching. I had to lead from behind
yes.
rather than from the front. I needed to focus on um, people and culture. I needed to be stronger around my consistent messaging, need to develop storytelling abilities. I also felt more isolated than I expected.
Yeah.
Um, I no longer had a functional team. I no longer had peers. Uh, and I was also really unsupported. I reported into uh, the US office, and literally uh, the C-suite of the total global organization that I report to. As long as I delivered the numbers, there was kind of very little other.
Interaction.
I was also surprised about the scrutiny. I learned that employees, partners, other stakeholders were watching. You know, every word, uh, every movement uh, was analyzed. So there were a few things that surprised me, but the excitement of learning and of reigniting uh, growth in otherwise mature, profitable company. There was both surprise and excitement in equal
Yeah,
measure.
you can choose any phase of your incredible career to answer this question, but I'm always intrigued by people's relationship to feedback. And was there some feedback along the way that you that was hard to hear, but was actually quite instrumental in your success?
Yeah, look, over my career, I have conducted literally dozens of 360s. Um, I've done more than 20 inventories. I've done 4 LSIs, the leadership style inventories, uh, which all had feedback from direct reports, peers, managers over time. Um, this was something that I was really focused on. And in hindsight, this is going to sound weird, a little too much. I probably had a little too much perspective. Sometimes uh, ignorance uh, leads someone like me not to overthink,
Yeah.
right? And that was a big focus for me. I was always in my head overthinking, making sure that I had a strong alignment between my own view of myself and others and the impact, because I genuinely wanted to have an impact and I wanted to support others to be brilliant. But what I learned from that feedback was that I had off the charts levels of achievement. It
Mhm.
goes back to this um, a really strong sense of responsibility, um, high levels of perfectionism,
Yeah.
and I don't say that with any joy
No.
at all. And I'll touch on that in a moment. And thankfully, high levels of committed to developing others. And what I also learned that I had almost no need for dependence. I was avoidance, um, no need for convention, no need for power. I didn't want to control. That was not something of interest to me. And I had no need for approval. When you look at
Mm.
the LSI, that's what people were telling me consistently. But what I did was having these high levels of perfection and then learning more about it and seeking some advice and support on it I knew I was burning a lot of fuel.
Yeah.
Um, I was spending uh, a lot of time at work and not enough time on me and not enough time on family. And I was really harsh on myself. I was my own judge and jury.
Yeah.
Um, and I was never satisfied. And I had this relentless pursuit of just improving. I would never celebrate a win. My team would want to celebrate, and the thing I would say is that, how do we do this better?
Yes.
And they would say, hey, JB, why can't you just be? This is a good result. Um, and I learned that I needed to uh, accept without judgment myself.
Mm.
Okay. And that because I had a just this engine that would drive. I was a pace setter, and for some people, this was a they would learn, and I would support them, and others the standards were too high.
Yes.
So it came at a cost, and it was a big lesson, and it came from the feedback that that I the reflection of the feedback that I'd learned, and it was the LSI in the latter part of my career that at Westfield, which was I said I need to learn more about this. This is something that I have to learn more about myself. So
Mm.
that was where I got to.
Particular mentor or sponsor who had a huge impact on your career?
This is a lesson for the listeners of this. I didn't have many mentors,
No.
and I didn't have much of a network.
Yeah.
Um, I grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney, and I didn't go to a very good school. I didn't go to a great university. Um, and for me, it was about self-reliance.
Mm.
And I felt, and this was poorly judged, I felt that networking was something that was uh, not very authentic.
Yeah.
I actually shunned network events because I felt profoundly that um, I would just work in the best interest of the company and that effort would be recognized and results would be rewarded. It even goes further. Not once in my career did I ask for a promotion.
Yep.
Not once did I ask for a salary increase. never.
Mm.
Um, and I just worked my backside off because I knew I wasn't terribly talented. Um, but I knew I just had to out effort um, to keep growing. So I didn't have um, a mentor,
Yeah.
to be frank, and that is an absolute shortfall.
Mm.
And nor did I have a big and broad network, but I did value and appoint a coach, as
Yeah.
I said, when I was appointed managing director. And when I did my work, my last LSI, I remember seeing the human resource director, who was amazing at Westfield. And she said, JB, would you be open to getting some support on the perfectionism? And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So we I got a coach to help me for 6 months on coming to some reflections around what was driving that perfectionism and the uh, the when overused the negative impact it was having on me.
Incredible. Incredible share across so many of those things, which I really appreciate. People might debate the talent with you, but what's changed? Do you stop and celebrate now?
Yes, I think I learned that I needed to, and this is going to sound strange. It's going to be the strangest things people are going to hear. I needed to bring my mind back to my body,
Yes.
learn more
Yes.
about what my body was telling me.
Yep.
For 29 years, I disregarded my body. My mind was so strong and my drive was so strong. Um, uh, and I then learned to just
Yeah.
to accept that a feeling was rising, and not judge it.
Yeah.
Again, I apologize, that might sound a little strange, but many executives skim through their life.
Yeah.
Um, and one executive search firm leader said to me, "You wouldn't believe how many CEOs um, get to an age where they become an ATM to their children. Uh, they do something silly at work. They have some kind of addiction. Their marriage breaks up, um, and uh, the amount of unhappiness in some senior leaders um, was something that you just don't see. You
No.
see these people as bulletproof, and they're not. Um, and uh, I got to the point where I wanted to change my gear. I wanted to spend time with my wife. I
Mm.
wanted to spend time with my sons, particularly at that time. And I wanted to create a portfolio career. So, some consulting, some work with startups and helping others.
Mm.
Charity work, that's been a big theme for me, with the Heart Research Institute or the Sunnyfield Disability Services, uh, and helping young executives. They're things that are really important to me, along with my non-executive director roles.
I love what you've said there, JB, and it doesn't sound strange. And I think it's interesting because so often we self-check ourselves about, am I moving into a space where, I don't know, is that too woo-woo for people or whatever? We stop and question it. And so many executives, myself included, we spend our whole life thinking our way through problems, and we get very, very good at thinking our way through problems. um, we disconnect from our bodies.
Yeah.
We really do disconnect. So I love how you've brought that into the conversation, and I love how intentional you've been about how do I craft this life for yourself that's fulfilling so many different areas. I think it's incredible. So you're now in a position sitting on so many boards where you actually get to make CEO appointments. It's the most important decision a board does. So what do you look for? And then how do you know a team's set up for success?
Yeah, I agree. I think the appointment and how you work with the CEO is the most important decision the board makes. Um, and the board needs to straddle both support and accountability. Um, and it needs to, the CEOs I always work with, they need to know that it comes from a place of, and this is going to sound strange, a place of love.
Yes.
I want you to be successful because only then can the company deliver on its performance and its governance, serve all stakeholders and its shareholders. So I look for in a CEO, and it is brief dependent because sometimes you'll need a brief. There's a brief for a step change. There might be a brief for a sustaining, incremental, performance. So there will be different stages a company's in and a brief. But notwithstanding, the general things I look for is firstly a customer obsession.
Yeah.
Okay? Um, that is often missing because many CEOs have come through non-customer uh, um, functional areas.
Yes.
So that is the area that I absolutely look for. Obviously, strategic visioning, the ability to inspire the organization, to have a view of the future, the financial and the operational acumen, budget, planning, prioritization, making choices, decision making is really important. Um, High levels of the ability to communicate clearly, transparently, listen, um, and be a great speaker,
Mm.
but do it with humility. A collaborator, a connector, uh, someone who can collaborate at all levels through the organization and externally. A strong sense of innovation, uh, disciplined execution, someone that can combine the strategic visioning, but also get the thing through the organization. And then finally, personally, someone with great EQ, um, uh, ethics, um, corporate social responsibility, integrity goes without saying. These are the table stakes. And I think these skills come together. Someone who can take others with them, drive for results, and kind of shape the future. They're the things that I look for. Not everyone can do all of it, but it's about helping them around that brief.
And that's where I was going to say, have you met many of those unicorns who've got every single,
No, no, it's yeah. This is the ideal. We're all human,
yeah.
and no one gets to that. But helping them, uh, you know, build on their signature strengths, and help them with any blind spots is something that is all boards should be focused on. Yeah.
JB, you are a lifelong learner. We've seen that, right? Like at every stage. And I feel like also just reflecting back, it feels like the 4 to 5 year periods turned into 8 to 9 year periods. So I'm interested to know if we're going into an 18 to 20 year period next, and we're sort of doubling each time we move forward. But one of the things I love is you do a series of predictions each year. So on LinkedIn, you do a series of yearly predictions for people. What inspires you to do that, firstly? And then I want to tease out your perspective because I know you're very passionate about it, the sort of skills leaders need for the sort of uncertain future we're charting right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I pride myself on doing a couple of things each year. One is a deep dive into an area of interest, and I do a paper. So, for example, I did a paper recently on the drivers of hyper growth companies. What are they? What are the common characteristics? I've done work on e-commerce and advanced e-commerce and technologies. So I do a kind of a deep dive each year, and then I do a little predictions piece. Part fun, part thought leadership, and it's really to catalyze a discussion because I truly believe that having a view on the near future helps leaders prepare plans, guide present decisions, mitigate risks, um, direct innovation. And I also think that it's about creating scenarios, likely material scenarios. What's probable and what could have a big consequence? Most of us think about this through the lens of risk. Okay. But why don't we look at this through a lens of scenarios that lead to opportunities. Okay. Because if we look at the last 5 years, it's taught us, even think about just the last 5 weeks with
Mm.
what's happened in the geopolitical environment. What we know is the environment is volatile, it's uncertain, dynamic. Um, and I think leaders need to be thinking, planning a range of scenarios. You won't get all of it right, but the very virtue of your leaders saying, these are, we think, are three scenarios of the future. And if these things happen, here is how we're going to react, or these are the opportunities for us. And they can be tailwinds or headwinds. But I think leaders need to build agility and resilience, see around corners, and be the first person to see the future first.
How do you fill yourself up? I mean, we're in this sort of attention economy where there's so much material.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, what, how do you, I mean, you've been intentional and you have the space to do this.
yes. I capture on my phone. I have notes, future. So through the year, things I come across, things that I've seen, heard, um, I have experienced, I'll write in the future tab,
Mm.
just saying these are things that are shifting, or I've read an incredible article, or seen a incredible, video or podcast, and I'll bring all this together and try to distill it into things that matter for the businesses. And I write it for business I'm involved in firstly, and then share it as a catalyst on LinkedIn. I don't post really one or two things a year, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it's always stuff that I've created, or curated, I think is
Yes.
fair to say.
Okay. So what sources do you rely on? You know, like you fill yourself up with lots of things, but what sort of areas, I mean, what skills do you think people should be looking at, thinking about? What material should they be accessing?
Yeah, I think people have their own decisions around what video, podcasts, feeds, publications that matter. Yeah, I think when you talk about skills to navigate that future, which was the second part of your original
Yeah.
question on this topic, um, I think the CEOs I talk to, and there's some evidence to support this, that CEOs are increasingly concerned that their businesses don't have the essential skills to adapt and navigate the changes. PwC recently, I think as late as November or December of last year, released a CEO survey that said, particularly in the area of AI,
Yes.
CEOs, it was of, I think, their largest concern was their workforce is not equipped to manage the changes coming on AI. And then Sydney University late last year, I was at South by Southwest, and they released what they call the Skills Horizon, looking at a range of skills through a myriad of sources. But in summary, technology literacy, specifically around generative AI, and the role it will play. And that's that I'm using uh, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude daily,
Yes. So,
almost daily. Um, Data fluency, cybersecurity, that's an area that I've been very focused on. And as I said, at Zip, it was, I knew that we had, millions of customer records and deep PII data. And I remember saying to the board, we need to, and this is years ago, I want to say maybe 4.5 years ago, I said, this is a disruption in operations or loss of customer data is a critical risk, and the board needs to lean in a deep way. And we were meeting monthly around our risk performance, our risk dashboards, our risk roadmaps, and ensuring that the whole C-suite knew that this was something that was critical. And then privacy and the links in that. So that technology literacy is, I think, going to be a critical theme as it is now. Adaptability and flexibility, that growth mindset to thrive under uncertain environments. Critical thinking,
mhm.
the ability to distill. To your point, we're bombarded with messaging, information, advertising. How do you distill what I call the so what.
Yes.
Where is the gold versus all the mud when you're panning all this information? Because we have complex challenges, um, and yet we have our minds are being trained for to skip and swipe, and yet the problems that we have as society and our businesses are going to require deep, thoughtful, collaborative thinking, the emotional intelligence, the empathy, the ability to self understand, to build optimism with teams. These are critical. I still believe inclusive leadership is matters, despite the political environment over the last few weeks. I look at what's structural and what's cyclical, and the move away in the political conversations we're having on inclusivity in the US, I won't last. I truly believe we need to focus on those structural kind of shifts, and I also believe cultural competencies, understanding different cultures, ethical decision making, and how do we build resilience to confront global, sustainable, and technological advances are critical, and these skills need to be part of every executive's continual learning. Uh, Real world experiences stretch, and the preparedness for the future.
Do you know, again, JB, so many questions about that. It's almost like, where do I start with it? But I read an interesting book over summer, and it was by Martha Beck. It's called Overcoming Anxiety. It came out in January. And the interesting thing about it was it talks about going back a little bit to that conversation we had about that left brain space. And it's, as executives, we spend time there in spreadsheets, in calendars, in all this organizational logic kind of based stuff. One of the skills I've seen, and I hear it with what you're talking about, is creativity is incredibly important for future executives. And yet we can't really harness it when we're in this logical step by step kind of space all the time. Like, how do you describe a leader's kind of learning routine, or how do they get into the space or find it to focus on this stuff, to make it a priority?
Well, I think every leader needs to be curious enough about learning. As I said, I'm a strong believer that if you're not learning, with the amount of change going on, you're becoming less relevant every day. And learning is about, I've always prided myself on and hopefully contributing a perspective or frame that hopefully advances the business, into the future. And so I do read and consume, widely and try and distill kind of, what matters to me and my businesses. So learning is fundamental, and leaders need to be disciplined about it. Disciplined about how much time they're spending on customers,
Mm.
on them as leaders, their learning, their personal health, with internal matters and people, on strategy, the external environment. They need to be really intentional about how have they got those balanced. And every time I speak to executives, they go, "How much time are you spending with customers?" They say, "Not enough." "How many times are you enough spending on learning?" "Not enough." "How many time are you spending on yourself?" "Not enough." Well, what are you spending your time on? And when you unpack that, they come to a realization that some of the stuff they need to do faster
Yep.
or do better, automate. Some of it they don't need to do at all and delegate. And some things they need to stop,
Mm.
unproductive habits. So they need to be intentional about some of those decisions. And, I also do some consulting with a range of businesses and help them through strategic planning. I was with a fantastic business only last week. And the hardest thing is to stop anything. The hardest thing is to say, how do we create the capacity for you guys to spend some more time on your learning, and the future? And then everyone just keeps pushing back. No, need to do this, the same. And I said, well, then you're never going to adapt. You're never going to see that future. Um, and then someone in the room goes, guys, we need to make this change. And then it starts to unravel. Yeah, but it's hard to do.
It's one of those massive disciplines. And, as an MD yourself and then through your roles in boards and working with other executives, it's like, how do you help people get really clear on only focusing on the things, well, narrowing their focus to the things that are going to have the biggest impact, but then aligning the organization to get it done?
Oh, wow. Alignment, I think, is a really important kind of theme. Because I think we all have good intentions. Uh, no one aspires to disappoint customers, disengage employees, destroy shareholder values, but
Yeah.
some leaders do that, right? And there is a gap between intention and the reality, and it needs focus and it needs alignment. Um, and in the organizations I work with, I always talk about the importance of alignment. Um, and because I truly believe that um, the most aligned organization will win
Yeah.
because it captures all of its resources, all of its people uh, to the outcome, the result, if you like. So the range of initiatives I use for alignment is first of all, get everyone to understand and have the same language around the customer. Get on the same page around the brutal facts. Many businesses, they don't want to accept or lean in to the truth about their company
Where they are.
and where they're at. Um, Co-create the strategic plan. Where do we play? How do we win? Co-create with your team the balanced scorecard. What matters? Let's measure it. We're going to align on that. Create an environment for disciplined decision making. Be really intentional about the types of decisions you're going to make. I actually say to a few leaders, there are four types. Sometimes you're going to go to the mountain and you're going to tell, and that's okay. You don't want to do that too often,
Yeah.
but sometimes you're going to have to do that. But mostly you're going to want to get inputs, and then you're going to make a decision. Sometimes you're going to want to have a consensus, and sometimes you're not going to make decisions. Sometimes you're going to delegate it. And then what I learned by being one of the deep dives I did many years ago, thought leadership, was trying to deeply understand Amazon.
Mm.
And I did this piece. It's available on SlideShare, and it's called Understanding Amazon. And they've got a range of type one, type two decisions. They've got this other concept which is called um, disagree but commit. What does that mean? Is we want divergence, and it's okay for you to disagree. But once we've had disagreement, we've had debate, and we've made the best possible decision with the data we have and the evidence we have and our own intuition, then it's not okay to not commit.
Yeah.
Everyone commits. No one leaves the room not committing. And we don't want to hear it again unless there's new information. And I think that's important because too often, and I've been this as an executive, where we've got to a decision and people leave the room and say, that was really poor. Yeah, I don't agree with it. And they're passively, that's misalignment. And my view is if that consistently happens and you're unhappy, find somewhere else to be happy ultimately. But you've also got to cascade plans, OKRs, objectives, key results, through the organization relentlessly. You have to then monitor it, expect what you expect. And then you've got to align the rewards, okay, the succession plans to and your performance plans to the align. So alignment really matters,
Yeah.
and it can bring the organization undone and lead to a lot of waste
And it's a
without.
magical feeling as a CEO when you get that moment to
Yeah,
experience it. Magical when you
yeah,
can.
yeah. The story I tell, I had the fortune of visiting Apple at Palo Alto in I think it was 2012, and they shared with us their purpose, enriching lives through technology. We think differently and creatively about technology, and it went on. And then about 3 days later, the group that I was with was in a store in Seattle, and we were meeting with the store manager. And she said to us, "Well, Apple, we enrich lives through technology. We think," and I'm there going, she said almost the things that we heard, a few days earlier in their in their
Yes.
support office at Palo Alto. And it was then I knew there was really clear alignment at all levels of the organization.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is the North Star.
JB, you said something when you and I caught up before we recorded the interview, and it's stayed with me. I'll probably call the interview that, but how you focus on doing things that bring you oxygen.
Yeah, look, I think what I learned through my reflection after a range of my learning around my own perfectionism was that I needed to bring my mind back to my body and do the things that expand me. Okay? The analogy of bring me oxygen, and do less of or find ways to cut out the things that weigh me or contract me.
Yes.
And I've used this with people that I've coached over time. Does it bring you joy? Does it expand you? Does it bring you oxygen? Or does it weigh you down? Does it contract you, bring you anxiety, if you like? And when you get a few little, at my age, which is 57 in a week's time, and when you get a few people in your life that who are your age who have died, meaning friends. And I had a very close cousin who died at 54, and it really impacted me. And it meant that we're not here for long. So have a positive impact and be kind and wise. So for me, the things that bring joy are, obviously my family, my sons, just seeing them learn, develop quality relationships, and find little ways of little achievement. Um, Again, achievement. They're things that really excite me. Spending time with my cousins, I have close family, and hosting them. Uh, and I write music. There's music in my head all the time. So I spend one day a month in the studio. It's my happy place. Recording. It's the time where I get into the place called flow. If you've ever done work around uh, authentic happiness and uh, optimism, it's that moment where you kind of lose sense of time. And I write music. I'm old enough and smart enough to know that no one else wants to hear it. It's for myself, but it brings me a lot of personal joy.
Incredible. JB, the final question, and I literally could go on for hours with this because we've got so much more to talk about. I know that. But the final question I ask everybody is, what does brave feminine leadership mean to you, and do you think it needs to change?
I don't think it needs to change. I think it needs to continue and strive forward. It combines for me the qualities of empathy, intuition, collaboration with strength, resilience, courage. Um, it embraces that strength and compassion, inspiration, and empowerment. I think it improves collaboration. It builds stronger relationships. It creates positive change. And I also truly believe it's more likely to lead to outperformance for an organization. For me, it's more Angela Merkel,
Mm-hmm.
Justin Trudeau,
Mm-hmm.
Jacinta Ardern,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also the antithesis of President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I truly believe that.
Yeah.
And in the last weeks, it's been really concerning for me. Some of the shifts backward. So I don't think it has to be um, only delivered by females. Feminine brave leadership is the spirits that I talk through. Um, and I've worked, in marketing, and the organizations that I have worked with have been, with the exception of Westfield, had very strong um, uh, female leaders that for me was about supporting and learning from and applying some of that empathy, intuition, and my mother, who who I play a role in caring for, looms large in my life. Um, and you know, yeah, I want her to be proud of the impact that I have. Yeah.
JB, an amazing conversation. Happy birthday for a week time. It'll be past by the time people are listening to this. Happy birthday.
Thank
And
you. Thank you,
one
Mel.
day, if we should be so lucky, one day maybe we'll get to hear some of that music. But thank you for joining me. I've thoroughly loved our conversation.
Thank you, Mel. I really appreciate it.